Now, if you know me, you'll know that I've always been a bit of a gamer. From Smash Bros to Minecraft to Stardew Valley to Pokemon to Skyrim to Valorant to Fallout and even all the way to Zoon Tycoon 2. It would be hard to find a more potent formula for degeneracy if you tried. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until of course a new game came along. A game that I had only heard about through hushed whispers for fear that any eavesdroppers or passerbys might judge harshly those that utter its name. A gamer's community is almost as much of a reputation as the game itself. A game that so many knew of, but few truly knew about. What was the game, you ask? It was World of fucking Warcraft, you idiot. What did you think this video was going to be about? Jesus. So against my better judgment and fragile sleep schedule, I booted up World of Warcraft for the first time ever to see if I could find any enjoyment in this hub for veteran no-life, reefers, sweaty guild leaders, and casuals alike that I had heard so much about, and began not only my first Warcraft experience, but my first MMO experience as well. The first thing I did as I got into game was make my character, obviously. Since World of Warcraft is the aforementioned hub of degeneracy that it is, there are naturally certain races and classes that are more widely frowned upon than others. Take the humans for example, because why? It's a human, like bro, come on, at least pick something slightly fun. Only slightly better than the humans are the furry races, the Pandarans, Taurens, Worgans, and Vulpera. And, oh, wow, there are a lot of furries, Jesus Christ. Despite the various crimes of the humans and the furries, the worst race in the game is indisputably the gnomes. I mean, just look at them, come on, they look like someone dropped a dwarf baby on its head and then allowed it to reproduce. The thing is just, ugh. But Blizzard didn't just stop there. Oh no, in the Battle for Azeroth expansion, they added the Mecha Gnomes. Now, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually think Mecha Gnomes are kind of sick. Like, sure, they're gnomes, but that's really only a name, and in reality, they were created because some dude was super into gnome eugenics and only wanted the smartest gnomes to come with him to his junkyard for smart gnomes, and if any gnome tried to follow them that was deemed too stupid for the colony, they just murdered them with their gnome eugenics ray of death.
Alright, let's crank this baby up and see what happens.
Incompatible presence detected. Unworthy subjects will be neutralized.
So actually I'm a huge fan of the Mecha Gnomes, but yeah, I picked Night Elf and began my journey into Azeroth. After finishing up the tutorial and spending a few hours in game, I quickly learned that nothing in this game would be learned quickly. It was going to take me hours before I was even sort of comfortable with anything that was going on, and if I was going to truly experience what this game had to offer, I was going to have to put in some work. The thought of this was quite daunting, seeing as retail has like 8 expansions at this point, and there are like a million things to do in this game. For example, PvE, PvP, raids, achievement hunting, exploring, guild, RP, pet battles, completion, fishing, mount hunting, death rolling, trolling, questing, maxing out loot, blah blah blah. Needless to say, I was quite intimidated and honestly a little concerned as to whether I would be able to find something in this game that would hook me before the overwhelming force of 8 expansions of content and the stress included with learning them was brought down upon me all at once. The biggest thing that immediately confused me was the story itself, or rather the way the story was presented. After finishing the tutorial, I was sent to Stormwind, the main city of the Alliance, where I assumed I would be starting with the base game that was released about 17 years ago. After all, wouldn't it make sense for a game so centered around characters and lore to start off new players where it all begins so they can gradually play their way through it and experience the content in the same way the people playing since TBC or Wrath have? Well, actually it begins with the Warcraft trilogy that was released before WoW, but I can't really do much about that. I was looking forward to questing and leveling through all the expansions and really taking the time to dive into the history of Azeroth. Besides, when it comes to video games, story is one of the things I really care about, and World of Warcraft having almost 2 decades of story content was one of my main motivations for playing in the first place. Well, it turns out I'm a fool, because after spending about 20 minutes in Stormwind, the main quest had me shipped straight off to Kultiris to begin the Battle for Azeroth expansion. In hindsight, this is extremely annoying and really just complete and absolute fumbling of the bag on Blizzard's side. Not that that should be a surprise to anyone. At the time, however, I was content to just play through BFA and see what the game was like. After all, I initially wasn't looking to get into any of the more hardcore aspects of the game, I just wanted to play through it and maybe I'd find some part of the game I wanted to get deeper into as I progressed. So I'm about 2 hours into my first playthrough here, and this is where I feel like we get into Blizzard's second huge blunder. Now, I know I said earlier that WoW was my first MMO experience, and while that's kinda true. It also does leave out the fact that I grinded Wizard 101 hard when I was like 8. Looking back, the game was the embodiment of everything modern MMO players hate. It was rife with store mounts, pay-to-win content, there was no real way to build community, and it wasn't just bogged down with fetch quests, it was only fetch quests. Despite everything, it was one of the first games, if not the first game, I really loved. I mean, God, I still have the username and password burned into my memory, and in 70 years when I'm decaying in an old folks home, that password will probably be one of the last things to go, along with the lyrics to Fireflies and the names of literally every dinosaur featured in BBC Earth's Walking with Dinosaurs. The point is that Battle for Azeroth is often, like really often, critiqued as being the worst WoW expansion by far. Like, ever. But that's okay, because years of questing in Wizard 101 had left me a hardened fetch quest veteran, and don't try to argue with me on that. You weren't there. You don't know the horrors of getting a 3rd quest in a row to kill an enemy until you get 15 items, only for the item to be a 20% drop rate. You just don't know. However, not everyone has my experience or tolerance for such a high capacity of bullshit. So when the new players for your game come in and the only content they're allowed to experience on the free trial version is the most boring part of your worst expansion, you suddenly find yourself in close competition with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and DaBaby for the Guinness World Record in making shitty decisions. Despite this, I played through the base game of BFA. TLDP, the Alliance sends you to Borealis, the capital of Kultiris, which is a landmass right next to the main allied continent that apparently no one knew existed until 2018, to see if the Kultirans would be interested in joining the war effort, and they decided the best person to send with you is the disgraced Kultiran princess or whoever that everyone there literally hates because they blame her for her dad dying or whatever. She gets thrown in jail and you're asked to unite the 3 regions of Kultiris so that the queen will trust you or something. You go through each region and do dumb quests helping people and killing things until you finish the 6 to 8 chapter questline in each region, and you go back to Balearis and help the queen resolve her mommy-daughter issues, and then everyone's happy. Definitely not the best story ever conceived, but what lost me was what came after. The patches that came after BFA's initial release brought in a few more quests and storylines, so immediately after I finished the main quest line, I went on to do the war campaign quest because it seemed like the natural progression of things. All I really remember is you go with the Kultirans to 3 different outposts in Zandalar, another continent right next to the Eastern Kingdoms that no one knew existed until 2018, to help them set up shop. After the initial quests establishing the outposts, I just kind of felt like I was being given the same quest over and over with no end goal, so I moved on. Next was the Heart of Azeroth questline, where a dwarf ghost, a dragon man, and a giant robot computer had me get this stone called the Heart of Azeroth, which, as far as I could tell, was a very overpowered item that gave me a ridiculous amount of strength that far outleveled most of my other gear. The only stipulation being that I couldn't use it outside of Azeroth, which means that unless Blizzard plans to make every single future expansion take place on a different world or in a different dimension, they're going to have to A, throw a new landmass into Azeroth and pretend like no one ever discovered it over the course of the past 17 years, and more importantly, B, create a new necklace to make the Heart of Azeroth obsolete, which would mean it would have to be even more overpowered than the Heart of Azeroth was, blah blah blah. The Heart of Azeroth storyline also introduces Azerite-infused armor, which was regular armor that could be given buffs similar to those granted by the Heart. These weren't quite as OP, but still pretty significant. Little did I know, I just had my first entanglement with a system. You see, I had unknowingly made another mistake by assuming that the gear I came across would scale in an easy to understand way, so that if I got a new chest piece that was clearly better than the one I already had, I could equip the new one and move on. What I didn't know is that the entire Warcraft team has a very public fetish for adding as many different systems as possible to their game, and they will keep doing it until there is nothing left, but we will talk more about systems later, don't worry. Tying into the Heart questline was the N'Zoth questline, where basically there was this edgy eyeball who probably found Twitter too early in his life and now all he wants is darkness. This shouty ghost dwarf told me that it was my job to enter N'Zoth's visions that displayed what Azeroth would look like under his control and kill whatever mini-boss was there. After doing these a couple times, I realized there were only 2 different visions I could enter and therefore 2 different bosses to kill, therefore it was boring and I didn't care. Not only that, but in order to gain access to the visions, you needed to farm a bunch of coalescing visions from world quests in order to buy a vessel of horrific visions, and yeah, I really just couldn't be fucked. The other content that the BFA patches added came in the form of Mechagon and Nazjatar, 2 new zones, each with their own mini stories, and that's right, new systems. I played through Nazjatar first, which was this underwater Atlantis type place that the Alliance and Horde just kind of fell into, and I went around and did quests for the fish people until I was given my first piece of benthic armor. Up until this point, I had been very happy with my azurite armor, but upon seeing the benthic armor come up in my inventory, I was immediately confused. Which one was better? The benthic armor is from newer content for a higher level, so surely it must be better, but my azurite armor has better stats because it's broken. But if I upgrade the benthic armor enough, it could have better stats. This was the first of a series of internal dialogues that I found myself having each time I encountered a new system, whether that be with armor or weapons or just stats in general, wondering if it was worth investing time into making it worth the swap. I finished the main story in Nashtatar and moved on to Mechagon, which in my opinion had the most entertaining story just because mecha gnomes are funny little tiny men. This was also the shortest story of all. The rebel gnomes, headed by the rebel prince, wanted to overthrow the king who had gone crazy, and I helped them do that. This area introduced another new system in the form of punch cards. Certain armor that dropped had slots for different either red, yellow, or blue punch cards, each providing their own advantages. The thing is, there are multiple of each color card, each having a random drop chance from random forms of content. So if you wanted to truly max out your punch card gear, you'd have to be willing to partake in a significant grind, just like every other system in this game. So yeah, that's pretty much all of BFA. The so-called worst expansion. I honestly didn't think it was terrible. Granted, I enjoyed it very casually and didn't have the experience with any of the previous expansions to compare it to, in contrast to many of the more experienced WoW players. However, if that was the worst one, I thought to myself, then Shadowlands, the newest expansion, must be pretty good. With this in mind, I shelled out $40 and hopped into Shadowlands. Since Shadowlands only had the base expansion out at the time I played it and 9.1 was still a few weeks off, I got through it pretty quickly. It was nice to feel a little more in tune with what was going on since I now knew the characters from my time in BFA. That is, I knew most of them. As anyone who has played WoW will know, the intro cinematic for Shadowlands shows Sylvanas, a character who was central to the story of BFA, and one who I felt like I understood at least on some level, throw down with the Lich King, a character I only knew due to the 2008 expansion's title and otherwise had no knowledge of. This is where the lack of world building included with the new player experience really started to bother me. I knew this guy was a big deal, but I didn't know why that was or why I should really care about him at all. To me, this cinematic was essentially just Sylvanas beating up on some guy who may as well have been an NPC named Quentin that gives one quest for you to go and find his favorite pig in the woods and return him to him for a hefty 15 gold. Now I'm thinking about it, the end cinematic to BFA was more of the same. I had come to the understanding that Saurfang and Thrall were important characters, but I still didn't really know why, and especially not to what extent. When Saurfang died, I was just like, okay, and moved on. This feeds back into the story of this game, coming across as just okay. It was enough to keep me playing, but not enough to make me give a shit. Maybe Saurfang's death was a big moment to those who have been playing the game for years on end, but due to my main questing experience being limited to BFA and after, I'll never understand why. So anyway, I watched Sylvanas beat the fuck out of Quentin and rip his helmet in half, which somehow opened up a rift in the fabric of space-time. She went into Shadowlands, which is basically the underworld, but up, and I followed her in along with many of the characters from BFA. We end up in the Maw, which is ruled over by this big fucker called the Jailer, who is apparently working with Sylvanas, but actually they both think they're manipulating each other into ultimately getting what they want. My Night Elf, of course, is special and is able to leave the Maw. Because upon leaving the Maw, I enter a floating church where I learn that God spends her time sorting out all dead souls into 5 categories: hippies, goths, boring people, war criminals, and fuckers who just go back to the Maw. Upon death, your soul is sent to God and she judges you then and there. Based on that, you spend eternity within the confines of your new cult. Surprise, surprise, they need me to go and resolve the internal conflicts within each of the 4 non-fucker destinations. This includes the now tired formula of arriving, being introduced to the area, doing about an hour-long questline that somehow helps fix things, reporting back to the church, rinse and repeat. After doing that 4 times, I got to choose my covenant, which basically meant pick the group that you like the most and help them more. I chose the hippies, became a theater kid, and that was it. The content from then on came in the form of daily and weekly world quests that fed into a new system. So the anima system. Basically every quest gave you anima, which you would put in the anima pool at the base of a big tree, and the anima lets you fund public works projects that make your life easier. Fuck it. This system was stupid and boring and I didn't like it, so I stopped doing shit with it. And there I was. I had accrued over 100 hours of playtime. I was done with all the up-to-date content and I needed something new to do. Of course, what I really wanted to do was go back and play through the old expansions, but I was level 60 now, which meant I could easily solo any any and all content up to the end of Legion. I looked through the transmog options for a rogue and played through some of the older dungeons in hopes to get cool helmets or whatever, but one-shotting every boss only has so much appeal. It was here I decided to try and grind for a mount. As you can imagine, in over 100 hours of playtime, I had seen hundreds of different mounts, and even gone and farmed a couple for myself. But there was one mount that caught my eye the moment I saw it, the one mount I had to have. The bee. To be honest, I actually learned about the mount pretty early on in my BFA journey and had been passively working towards the mount since. But with Shadowlands behind me, I was excited to finally have an actual goal that I felt was worth working towards. And although just one glance at the wiki told me that obtaining this beautiful bumblebee would be no simple task, I felt I really couldn't experience WoW without enduring at least one true mount grind. Now, if you know me, you'll know there are 4 animals I find to be genuinely funny, the absolute peak of comedy, the pinnacle of humor, with these animals of course being frogs, rats, bees, and monkeys. You need only glance at my battle pet roster for proof. Given this information, you can imagine my surprise and delight when I found out about the Honeyback Harvester, the bee mount available to Alliance only. It was at this moment I found my true purpose in this game, to become king, or queen I guess, of the Hive. Before I could even begin my journey to be the very best, I had to unlock Flight in BFA, which for some stupid reason is locked until you complete the achievement Azeroth Pathfinder Part 2. This quest requires completion of basically the whole BFA expansion, including the full and thorough exploration of Kultiris, Zandalar, Nazjatar, and Mechagon, the completion of the main story, the war campaign, and 100 world quests, and you have to earn revered status with each of the 8 new factions, which takes a while. Thanks, Blizzard. But why go to all this trouble just to get the ability to fly, you ask? Because what's the point of having a flying bee mount if you can't even fly with it? It would just be forced to crawl around on its 6 little legs. Okay, actually, wait, that would be kind of funny. Fuck it. So, to even begin the quest line for the mount, you first need to get your grubby little fingers on either a Bumbles or Seabreeze Bumblebee pet. Bumbles is acquired through a real-time 7-day time-gated event that requires hours of grinding, and the Seabreeze Bumblebee can be bought for 250 polished pet charms. At the time when I first learned about the mount, I had 25 of these, and the only way I could figure out how to get them was by farming daily pet battle world quests for about 10 to 20 a day. Considering my pets weren't even half of the recommended level for these fights, I had to make a careful decision as to which grind I was going to commit to. But then I realized there was a third choice. There's always a third choice. The auction house. I came very close to dropping about half my gold on the Seabreeze Bumblebee until I realized that I could also get the charms from war table battles, or whatever they're called. Although it would be slower to collect them, I wouldn't have to actually do anything. I could just start the mission and wait 8 to 12 hours until it was done. After finally getting all 250 charms, which took a little over a week, I took a flight path to Sister Liliana, the NPC who sells the pet. Eager to finally begin the quest, I scrolled through her inventory to the pet, only to find out that not only did I need 250 stupid charms, I also needed to have a revered status with the Storm's Wake faction. At this point, I was about halfway into honored status, which meant I was going to have to grind out about 6,000 rep worth of world quests. Let's fucking go! Yes! Yes! World quests. Yeah! After having finally finished my grind for pet charms and rep, I was able to buy my bee pet and begin the quest. With my new companion in stride, we made our way over to Barry Beekeeper, who is a guy named Barry who keeps bees. For some reason, this man knows more about bees than anyone else in Azeroth, which is why he spends his day idling just outside a small village waiting for other people with bees to come and talk to him. I am a people with bee, and I talk to him. Barry then shows us over to the main hive. The hive is actually just a honey-covered room carved into the side of a hill, not unlike a Minecraft starter house. There were a few bees inside, including the queen, who Barry was able to communicate with because of course he can. Barry informed me that the bees needed honey to raise their new bee larva, and I was to collect it for them and feed it to the larva until it grew up. Its growth was shown through a red bar that would fill a little every time I fed it a piece of honey. He then deceivingly pointed out that the honey could be found in the overworld, anywhere in Stormsong Valley. I say deceiving because although the honey clusters did exist, they were few and far between and hard as hell to spot. Not only that, but since I didn't have flying, the process of actually getting around was much slower, and even when I did find honeycomb, I only got one. If I had done this the way God intended, I would have had to sell my soul for that grind. Luckily, there exists a funny little market that I mentioned earlier called the auction house, where I could just buy the best quality honeycomb, which was as good as 8 of the overworld honeycomb. I was ready to spend all my money buying out the auction house day after day since I didn't have anything else I wanted to buy. I just wanted bee. After going through most of the gold I had amassed, I finally had enough to fill the red bar. However, that wasn't wasn't the way I wanted to finish this journey. After all, World of Warcraft is an MMORPG, and after over 100 hours, I had really only experienced the PG. I decided that for my WoW experience to be truly complete, I needed to get at least some player interaction. I stood in the main Borealis marketplace and RP'd as a poor traveler who just needed some honey to keep me going. I was more annoying than the homeless person that waves their sign in your face every time you try to walk out of Kroger. Unfortunately, just like your local grocery store lurker, I garnered very little attention, and by very little, I mean none. Annoying as I may have been, I still found it surprising that even on an RP server, no one was willing to humor me even a little. In a game that depends wholeheartedly on its community and player interactions, how has it been allowed to deteriorate to the point where no one will give anyone else the time of day unless they dare fuck up a dungeon puller? After having come to the realization that we truly do live in a society, I bought the rest of the honeycomb I needed, returned to the starter house, and turned in my final pieces of honey. As I watched the bar fill up, I felt content with my experience. It wasn't the best game I had played by any stretch of the imagination, but I had for the most part enjoyed it and was looking forward to ending the experience on a high note. I had played through 2 expansions and really felt like I had experienced everything this game could offer me, or at least everything I cared to do. I know there's a lot more content I never got into, such as raiding and PvP, but honestly that just doesn't sound enjoyable to me. Sure, raids and dungeons can be fun, but I don't ever want to spend hours in a Discord call while some 30-year-old yells instructions at me from the warm, if not slightly stuffy confines of his parents' basement, but that's besides the point. I turned in my last piece of honey, ready to interact with the now fully matured larva and to receive my mount. You can imagine my surprise when I clicked on the larva only to be greeted with a new bar. A bar that required double the honey of the first bar in order to fill it. As it turns out, I had not researched this quest thoroughly enough, which left me with no mount, no money, and no will to continue. The bee quest was supposed to be my crowning achievement, but instead was just another example of a ridiculous grind being implemented as a way to gatekeep content. I know I said earlier that I was willing to grind for this mount, but the path between the player and a goal can only have so many arbitrary roadblocks before it stops being a grind and becomes a chore. And seeing as I had already finished my job chart for the month, I wasn't really in the mood for more. And that was it. That was the end of my World of Warcraft experience as a truly raw and new player. As you can probably tell, my views on the experience looking back aren't nearly as positive as they were when I was playing through. That's due to a number of reasons, but I think the main one is that you don't want to be too critical on the game you're spending time and money on, because then it would feel as if you've wasted both. I think that's a big part of the reason why the hardcore player base has such a love-hate relationship with the game. They love WoW, or at least they love their perception of it, but in reality it's not anywhere close to what it used to be 15 or even 10 years ago. And they just don't want to admit that they're wasting their time trying to convince themselves that they're still having fun with a game they haven't liked since 2008. This all happened a couple months ago, and obviously a lot has happened concerning Blizzard since then. I wouldn't say I quit the game since I barely got into it in the first place, or at least not by MMO standards, but I'm glad I stopped playing because it's clear that the game is not in a good place right now, and it could be years before it ever even begins to recover. And although I'd love to spend weeks grinding to get the best gear introduced with the newest 9.1 system, I have multivariable calculus class that I'm just like a little bit more excited about. The 24 input 0 to death absolute wombo combo of Blizzard continuously digging itself into a deeper and deeper hole, the uninspired and repetitive new content that has been the standard since BFA and hasn't improved into Shadowlands, and the fact that more and more people, especially content creators, are quitting or at the very least taking extended leave from WoW to give other MMOs a try has been devastating to the game's player base and reputation. I think this recent discourse that's come out about what's happening with the game has been really interesting, so I've been trying to stay current with it. And I think the general consensus is that WoW is killing itself, and I really agree. If change is going to happen, it needs to start with Blizzard itself and how they operate, both internally and in regard to receiving and responding to community feedback. That alone should have a wildly positive effect on the content of the game from here on out. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what's next for me? What the fuck do you think? Haven't you been paying attention? I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV and I'm slightly addicted. Please send help. And if you're a level 50 goldsmithing crystal, hit me up. I want to get my relic weapon, please.